Let's shed some light on the thought of Mikhail Bakhtin, the Russian philosopher and literary theorist who reshaped how we read literature in the 20th century. Bakhtin believed that language is never neutral, it's always alive with competing voices, contexts, and perspectives. He placed special emphasis on what he called the site of struggle between authority and popular culture. And yes, that was asked in exam. Against traditions that treated meaning as fixed, Bakhtin introduced concepts that completely transformed literary criticism: heteroglossia, dialogism, the chronotope, the carnivalesque, and polyphony. Each of these shows how literature, especially the novel, is not a closed box of meaning, but a dynamic space where voices clash, intersect, and evolve. Pause here because his early work, Toward a Philosophy of the Act, sets the stage. In this text, Bakhtin argued that ethics isn't about abstract universal laws, like Kant suggested. Instead, it's about our unique participation in existence. Each of us is irreplaceable, and so we carry a moral responsibility to actualize our singularity. In Bakhtin's words, it is in relation to the whole actual unity that my unique thought arises from my unique place in being. Notice how he blends ethics and aesthetics. Our creative response to life itself becomes both an ethical act and a form of truth. Bakhtin is best remembered for his masterpiece Problems of Dostoevsky's Poetics, published in 1929, and this is where he develops two revolutionary ideas: polyphony and unfinalizability. Polyphony, taken from the language of music, means many voices. In Dostoevsky's novels, Bakhtin saw multiple characters speaking with their own authority, never reduced to the author's single viewpoint. Unlike traditional monologic writing, where the author controls everything, Dostoevsky allows his characters to stand side by side, each with independent truths. And then comes unfinalizability. Can you recall what this means? Simply put, it's the idea that human beings can never be fully defined, labeled, or finalized. Identity is always open-ended, always becoming. Dostoevsky's art, in Bakhtin's view, shows us this openness, this resistance to closure. Characters remain unfinished, their consciousness never fully captured. Pause here and note this down because it's a classic exam point. Bakhtin's vision of the novel is dialogic, a space where many voices, values, and perspectives interact without collapsing into a single truth. Against Western traditions that try to finalize meaning, Bakhtin insisted on openness, dialogue, and multiplicity. Let's have a look at one of Mikhail Bakhtin's most powerful cultural ideas, carnivalization, asked in exam. At first, it sounds festive, doesn't it? And that's exactly the point. Bakhtin borrowed the term from ancient and medieval carnival traditions, where laughter, masks, and role reversals created a world turned upside down. In this carnival sense of the world, kings could be mocked, peasants could play rulers, and authority itself was ridiculed. Pause here and note this down. It was asked in exam. Carnivalization is about how popular humor subverts official authority. It dissolves rigid hierarchies and creates a counterculture where everyone is equal, if only for a moment. It's a democratic energy that allows seriousness to be mocked, opposites to collide, and truth to be revealed through laughter and degradation. Dostoevsky's novels, Bakhtin saw carnivalization at work. Characters live on the edge of extremes: love versus hate, faith versus atheism, purity versus vice. Nothing stays fixed. Everything hovers at the border of its opposite. That's why critics like Gary Saul Mawson and Carol Emerson describe Carnival as the apotheosis of unfinalizability, a state of openness where no single meaning ever dominates. But Bakhtin didn't stop there. His famous study, Rabelais and His World, based on his dissertation, pushed these ideas further. Interestingly, the work was first denied official recognition because its ideas were so radical. In this book, Bakhtin explored Renaissance life, especially the humor and chaos in François Rabelais' Gargantua and Pantagruel. He argued that scholars had missed something vital, the way carnival, laughter, and popular language resisted authority. And here's something important to remember. It means how popular humor subverts official authority in classical, medieval, and Renaissance texts. And culture, asked in exam. At the center of the book are two concepts, carnival and grotesque realism. Carnival, as we've seen, symbolizes inversion of hierarchies, a collective festival where norms are suspended. Grotesque realism, on the other hand, celebrates the body in all its exaggeration, growth, and renewal. Through imagery of eating, birth, and even degradation, it highlights life's endless cycles of death and rebirth. Let's discuss one of the most influential works in literary theory, Mikhail Bakhtin's The Dialogic Imagination, published posthumously in 1975. This book is a collection of 4 essays written between the 1930s and 1940s, epic and novel, from the prehistory of novelistic discourse, forms of time, and the chronotope in the novel, and discourse in the novel. Together, these essays present Bakhtin's unique vision of language and the novel. Pause here and note this down. The central idea is heteroglossia, asked in exam. Bakhtin defined heteroglossia as the base condition governing the operation of meaning in any utterance. In simple words, whenever we speak, we don't use a private, isolated language. We use words that carry the weight of other people's voices, histories, and intentions. Every utterance is socially charged, perspectival, and situated in time and culture. Now here's the golden trick linked to heteroglossia is Bakhtin's concept of dialogism. He believed authentic human life can only be expressed through open-ended dialogue. Discourse for Bakhtin is never neutral. It involves the whole self, eyes, lips, hands, soul, spirit, whole body and deeds, all woven into the dialogic fabric of life. Unlike Saussure's static view of language or Kant's abstract reason, Bakhtin emphasized language as living, dynamic, and always contested. Can you recall which essay was asked in exam? Yes, epic and novel. Here, Bakhtin contrasts the epic with the novel. The epic aims for timeless unity and a single authoritative voice, while the novel thrives on plurality, diversity, and the ability to absorb other genres. That's why the novel, he argues, is the most adaptable form for modern post-industrial society. Interestingly, he traces its roots to Roman and Hellenistic romances, while later critics like Margaret Ann Doody and Georg Lukács gave their own genealogies. Lukács, for instance, famously called the novel the epic of a world abandoned by God, asked in exam. Another essay, From the Prehistory of Novelistic Discourse, highlights how multiple textual traditions fed into the modern novel. In Forms of Time and the Chronotope in the novel, asked in exam, Bakhtin introduced the chronotope, literally time-space. This concept explains how narratives create worlds by shaping the relationship between time and space. Think of how Dickens uses the city of London almost as a character, or how modernist writers experiment with fragmented time. That's chronotope in action. Finally, in Discourse in the novel, Bakhtin gives his fullest statement of linguistic philosophy. He argues that the novel is not a single voice, but a battlefield of voices. This is where heteroglossia becomes crucial again. Language always carries ideology, evaluation, and cultural positioning. That's why Bakhtin defined the novel as a phenomenon multiform in style and variform in speech and voice. Pause here. This is a classic UGC net zone. Remember the trio, heteroglossia, chronotope, and dialogism. These are Bakhtin's keywords, and they will almost certainly connect to questions on narrative theory. Let's discuss another powerful figure in structuralist thought, Juri Lotman. He was a Russian-Estonian literary scholar and cultural historian, and his ideas shaped the study of semiotics in the 20th century. Working at the University of Tartu, Lotman founded what became famous as the Tartu-Moscow Semiotic School. Pause here and note this down. This school quickly grew into a major hub for the study of science, codes, and the structures that shape meaning. Lotman didn't stop at literature. He expanded semiotics to study culture itself. Imagine culture as a vast text full of signs and codes, always interacting, always generating meaning. For Lotman, culture was not just background, it was a semiotic system. Every tradition, every opposition, every symbol is part of this grand structure. Can you recall what semiotics means? Exactly, it's the study of signs and how they communicate meaning. Lotman pushed this further by saying literature, art, and even daily practices are all systems of signification. Meaning then doesn't appear magically, it comes from codes and conventions that we learn and inherit. And here's something you'll love. Lotman stressed that meaning often arises through oppositions. Think of binary pairs like order and chaos, center and periphery, or life and death. These oppositions help structure how we interpret not only texts but also entire cultures. Pause here, because this is where Lotman's contribution really stands out. He gave us a method to read culture the way we read literature. Systematically, structurally, semiotically. And through this lens, culture becomes a dynamic system, always producing, negotiating, and contesting meaning.